I'm sure John knew what that was like. Therefore I was left alone and saw this great vision, and there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength. Yet heard I the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face towards the ground. So it's like they shared that exact same experience. What they saw was the same thing. John saw, Jesus Christ in that garment down to the foot, and girded about perhaps with a golden girdle. And what did Daniel see there in verse 5? His loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. He saw that golden girdle. His face is the appearance of lightning, and John saw, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. His eyes were as lamps of fire, is what Daniel saw. And what did John see? His eyes were as a flame of fire. John said, and his feet like unto fine brass. And Daniel said, and his arms and his feet like in colour to the polished brass. And his voice is the sound of many waters in John. And Daniel said, and the voice of his words was like the voice of a multitude. So we know what the many waters there, it's the multitude. And I just found that amazing that they both had that same experience, that God revealed himself to them in the same way, that when they saw Jesus Christ, they both saw the same thing. And even their reaction was exactly the same. John fell at his feet as dead, and Daniel said the same thing. I couldn't stand up, and I felt face flat on the ground. They both shared that very same experience. God revealed himself to them both in ways that were extraordinary and that perhaps others had not experienced. But I don't believe that it was just because they were the lucky ones. We look at people like Daniel and as I was reading him, I thought, what an amazing person, and the things that God revealed to him. But I don't think it was just because he was just plain and simply lucky, or he got the white ball in life. These were men who were steadfast and followed the Lamb wherever he went. These were men who drew nigh unto God, and God in response revealed himself to them in amazing ways. Again, if we would draw ourselves nigh unto God, he will draw nigh unto us. If we would give more of ourselves to him, he will give us a greater revelation of himself. Yes, we have to be completely given over to him, but if we make a conscious decision, I want to know Christ. I want to be like John, the one that sits there at his feet and listens. I want to hear his heartbeat and feel that, relate and have that relationship. Then God will then reveal himself to us. If we want to understand the mysteries of the Word of God, the book of Revelation, the heart of God, then we need to give ourselves over to that. We can consider Solomon, the wisest man to have lived. And what did he do? He said, I applied my heart to know wisdom. I gave my heart to know wisdom. And of course, he urged everyone else to do the same in the book of Proverbs when he says, apply thine heart to wisdom, to understanding, to have knowledge. He received wisdom from God in a measure that had not been received by anyone else. Consider Paul even, who picked up his whole life. And when God revealed to him his will, I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. And what did he do? He picked up. And for 3 years, he just went and he applied himself to understanding the Lord, to receiving the revelation from, the Old Testament and seeing Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. He didn't consider, the life that he had in Jerusalem. Well, this is going to be a real, step downwards for my career. And I was hoping that this time in my life, I'd actually be able to settle down and have a family and that kind of thing. He just picked up and he set himself to know God, to understand. He set himself to have that knowledge and that understanding. And again, God revealed himself to Paul in a way that made Paul a powerful minister, so that Paul could then open up the scriptures, the Old Testament, the reality of the Old Testament to the rest of the world. These are obvious examples and people who did extraordinary things. But I was even thinking about even a more simple sort of situation of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary, instead of making herself busy about doing all these things, she just decided that she was going to sit at the feet of Jesus and hear his word. Martha was about doing all the service and probably cooking and cleaning and better give him something to eat and whatever, and saying, Lord, make her help me. I'm doing all the work here. And he said, no, she's actually chosen the better thing, because she chose to just sit at his feet and learn. She just wanted to draw nigh unto him and know him. And so it's got to be for us, everything that we've committed ourselves to is good and we must do those things, but let's never forget every once in a while to come back and just sit at the feet of Jesus Christ and just hear his word. It's not all about the works, as we consider those in the book of Revelation chapter 2. Those at Ephesus, they did all the works, but what God wanted was for them to just sit at his feet and hear his words. And Jesus said, one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her, to know Jesus Christ and to have his truth revealed is not something that can just be taken away from us. Let's never forget to take the opportunity to set aside some time to sit at Jesus' feet and hear his word. Mary received something that day that shall not be taken away from her. She received understanding. She received revelation. And when I say revelation, I'm not talking about something new, something that nobody knew before, but just understanding, not just in her mind, but in her heart. When we receive revelation from God, it can't be taken away. Revelation isn't just something that makes sense and fits logically in our minds. It is something that also brings a peace to our hearts. You know, when you've received the truth, you can hear something and sometimes it can make a whole lot of sense in your head and it seems to fit, but then you know when something has actually reached your heart and it's like, yeah, I can rest with that. I'm satisfied with that. That brings a peace to me. That brings something to my heart. I believe the reason that many turn aside from the truth is because perhaps they did not receive the revelation. They're easily turned aside by a cleverly devised argument, or perhaps even just a smooth talker, somebody who can come up with a clever argument. But tonight I'd like to take a closer look at the man Daniel. So now we're going to spend a fair bit of time in the book of Daniel. And, when I was reading, I thought, yeah, there is a lot about the book of Revelation, but I thought maybe if I just can first understand about Daniel himself, then maybe then I'll be able to understand what God showed Daniel just by learning about Daniel. So we just considered Paul, who separated himself for a time that he might understand how Christ fulfilled the Old Testament and that he might receive the revelation of the truth. Daniel also purposed in himself that he would be separated for God's service. And we're going to see that when we start in Daniel chapter 1. And we know that Daniel was an Israelite. He was taken captive of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar had a plan for Daniel. Nebuchadnezzar had a plan for Daniel and his friends. And we read this in Daniel chapter 1 and verses 3 to 7. It says, "And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of the eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favoured and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning of the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego." So we can see that Nebuchadnezzar, he had a plan. His plan was to find the finest young people from among Israel. It's like he was just looking for some child prodigies or something like that. Let's take some of the finest of Israel and let's make some really good Babylonians from them. That was his plan. His plan was to teach them the language of the Chaldeans. He wanted to feed